No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, I just got back from a small trip. I went to go meet a client for a day. And I was on a plane to get there, and there was some pretty heavy turbulence on that plane during that flight. Mm-hmm. And I noticed something that I'd noticed many times before, but never thought about it. And for some reason, it just kind of dawned on me when this happened, that the moment the turbulence started, my knee-jerk reaction was to look at the flight attendants. And I think the reason why I've always done that is because you have to figure that they've seen everything there is to see when it comes to turbulence. And I guess I was looking for some kind of sign as to whether or not this is something to worry about or not. Because I've seen my fair share of turbulence on airplanes before. I've flown a lot. And these ones were bad. These were the ones where at one point I lifted out of my seat just a little bit, and I had my seatbelt on, so I was bolted down, but when that happened, I looked to the flight attendants and they seemed like they were chatting with each other. They were strapped in to their chairs. But they were chatting with each other, and that kind of immediately put like a calm over me, because I thought if I looked over at them and the looks on their faces were, oh my God, that's the first I've ever had that happen, then now it's time to panic, And it wasn't faked calm. It was real. Like they were just in a conversation with each other, and I could tell they'd seen it before. And the point I'm trying to make is that it had this calming effect on me as a passenger, because I immediately was able to go to a place of, well, if they're not worried by it, then I probably shouldn't be worried by it either. And I went back to listening to my music. Mm-hmm. And so this brought to mind something that I've been thinking about on the idea of stabilizing leadership. Leadership's role in making sure a team sees stability and consistency, and they can kind of look to their leader as that flight attendant that say, oh wait, if they're not worried, maybe I shouldn't be either. What do you think this is an important role of a leader? Can you think of instances where this is more important than in other times, and how big a part of your leadership role is this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that I think about is composure, professional composure. Sure. In situations, and there was an old saying that I heard a long time ago. It's kind of like, don't confuse a sense of urgency with a sense of emergency. Yes. Right. And yeah, absolutely. I think the times where it's most needed is times when there's drastic change, and change is, of course, like the only constant, and there's things that are always changing. There's things that are always evolving. But in most industries and most organizations, when you have things that are drastic change, a change of leadership, when you have potential like layoffs or restructuring, when there's potentially, a situation, an external situation that causes, a lack of sales or whatever the case is, sometimes it happens where there's somewhat of a drastic turn. Mm-hmm. And in those times, a team will look to a leader to your point, to find stability, to make sure that everything's going to be okay, and to watch them and how they react to these situations as a means of, is this really going to be difficult or hard, or will we maintain the course and stay committed to the things that we care about and that we're committed to. So I would absolutely say that it's a major part of leadership. And it's also one of those things that I think leaders that struggle with it get kind of tied up into that whole idea of like flavor of the week. They're the ones Sure. that no matter what's going on, everything's always an emergency. Everything is always on fire. Mm-hmm. They're overstressed, they're overworked, they don't have composure. So I absolutely believe it's a very strong part of leadership that's necessary for building a great culture.
Right. I like everything you just said there, and I think so. I had a teacher once in high school, I think, and they had a plaque or a bumper sticker or something on a file cabinet in the classroom that I read hundreds of times over the time I was there, and it said, "Leadership is the ability to hide your panic from others." It's obviously very, very simplistic, and leadership is a lot more than that. But there's a comedic element to it, and there's a little bit of truth to that. But I honestly think the leader that is constantly like the one you talked about, the one that the flavor of the week where everything's an emergency all the time, if everything is an emergency, then nothing's an emergency. I mean, we all know that. Yep. We all have the coworker that marks the red exclamation point on every email they send out because they're just trying to get people to read it. And it's like that worked for 3 days, and then now we just don't read what they say at all, and so if everything's an emergency, nothing is. So at the end of the day, that leader is still consistent. They're consistently bad. They need to work on their leadership skills, but the employees who know that leader to be the flavor of the week where everything's always an emergency, they will find comfort, at least in some part, in the consistency of that leader acting that way. And so when I'm talking about stabilizing leadership, I'm talking about more so what the first thing you said was, which is the leader's ability to remain who they are and rooted in what their values are, regardless of what's going on around them. And so that leader might have poor values in terms of, thinking that everything's an emergency. But if they remain rooted in that, regardless of what's going on, there's a little bit of comfort in that even. So if I'm thinking about as a leader, and you're talking about these big structural changes, when I was with Best Buy a long time ago, one of the leaders of the organization at a time when there was a lot of layoffs happening. This is many, many years ago now. He put out an internal email, and one of the things the email said was that that people's values aren't tested in times of where everything's great. Your values are tested when things go poorly, and then you can see if you hold to them. And I liked that email came out that said that, starting with, this was an opportunity for anybody who was going to be losing their job or losing their position. They had very, very generous severances offered to them at that time. And it was kind of like this comforting impact where it's like, even though we're deciding to do something different long-term, we're not going to leave people in a lurch. We're going to lead with our values, which is it's important to take care of people while taking care of the business. And so that led to a lot of people being a lot less stressed about their position going away because they knew they had a really big safety net underneath them and time to find another job. And I think that's important. The flight attendant on the plane, if she had this calm look on her face as she walked down the aisle, handing people oxygen masks and life preservers, that wouldn't be as calming either. So it's not necessarily about the look on the eye or what's being said. It's about the actions that occur in those times.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I remember very specifically, early in my career, being in a room during a conference call where it was on speakerphone and people were talking about some upcoming changes within the organization that I was with. And, they had mentioned that they were going to go away from this strategy that had been in place for probably not even 6 months. It was something that was tried. It was something that had mixed results kind of, in different parts of the organization. But they said, hey, we're going to go ahead and discontinue that. And I remember the leader of the team at that point just turning around and saying, well, then I don't know what we're going to do now. Like, this is crazy. We can't commit to anything. We can't stay with anything. Like, this is just, we might as well
in front of people. They said this
in front of the entire leadership team, right?
Oh, perfect, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly. We might as well just shut the doors and what are we doing here? And I remember just looking around the room and everybody just like what's happening right now? Are we going to go out of business? And what's the, and it incited, this entire, just feeling within the room of people of, creating stress and more questions and answers and this whole thing. And that leader, at the end of the call, just walked out of the room clearly upset and mad about the whole deal. And I remember there was another, an assistant leader that was in the room that after this person walked out, they said, hey, listen up, everybody. You know what I mean? Like here's one thing I can tell you. I've been with this organization for a long time now. We make changes like this all the time. Sometimes we have, great ideas and great strategies that we implement and we hold on to them and they become a part of who we are and what we do. And he said, and there's been times where we've made mistakes just like this. And I said, but here's the thing I appreciate most about this company. When we know it's a bad idea and it's not working, we stop doing it. No matter if it's 6 days or 6 months, we make the call and we cut it and we keep going. And I like the fact that as an organization, we have enough confidence and enough bravery to just do things like that. Which may seem out of the blue and it may seem kind of drastic, but if we feel it's the right thing to do, we're going to end it. And then all of a sudden, everybody was calm again, and it was like, oh, okay, well, like that makes sense, right? So, like to your point, if you were to hit a little turbulence, and then all of a sudden, the flight attendant's like, oh my God,
we're all gonna die.
Right, we're all gonna die, right? Like that's probably gonna send a different message.
Of course it is.
To everybody that's there. But that's what I remember. Like to this day, I remember that and saying, like, wow, like I can't believe this person that I thought was in charge, that typically has composure, makes the right calls, doesn't get caught up in the stuff. Like if they are on 11 as a result of them saying this, then this is not good. And
right.
then thankfully we had the other leader in the room who kind of brought us back into reality and really was able to give us some vision and some purpose behind what was going on and calm some of our nerves. But I'll never forget that lesson as a leader, and remembering that I have to show up, that way for my teams at all times. Is even if I have a personal feeling about something that's right, wrong, or indifferent, I have to be very conscious of what I share and how I share it, and making sure that I'm not working through my own emotions in front of my team.
Right. So when this happened, did you find yourself actually second guessing your own interpretation of the situation briefly because of their reaction and having to kind of remind yourself, wait, this isn't as bad as this person's making it seem?
Well, the funny part is like I didn't have all this context. So again,
okay.
like having a leader in the room react that way where I didn't have all the larger context of what was happening or the history of what the organization had done in the past. I was like, what's going on here? Like, this is madness. This is crazy.
Right.
You know what I mean? And until the other leader was able to provide that perspective, then I said, oh, okay, well, like that makes a lot of sense. I can understand that. You know what? Like, yeah, good for the company, for doing something like this. If we think that it's wrong, then let's stop it. Even if it was right for our team or our location, even if we were seeing success with it, if it was doing things for us, which is, I think, why the initial leader had the reaction they did. If the organization saw that it wasn't a better, scalable strategy that was winning everywhere, they decided to end it. So yeah, I definitely had the roller coaster of emotions in a very short window.
I mean, it calls to mind something that applies both in leadership and in life, which is that we are 10% what happens to us and 90% how we react to those things. And so, nothing changed about the situation. All that changed was two different leaders explaining what the ramifications were of that situation, and being interpreted differently. And it wasn't like the situation was going to change based on how a person interpreted it or sold it to their team. So if you're a leader, your job, if you're lacking context, don't fill it in with emotion. If you're lacking context, go gain it. Go get the context. If your company is going out of business, then maybe that kind of reaction is appropriate for the moment. But clearly it wasn't, and clearly the organization was around after what happened, as it was after previous decisions they made where they changed course. And it kind of reminds me of there's a book I love, one of the best leaders I've ever had shared with me many years ago, called The Art of Possibility. And in the opening chapter of the book, The Art of Possibility, is this story of a shoe company CEO sending their best to business development leaders to a country in Africa to see if they should start selling shoes there. After a few weeks, the first salesperson or business development manager calls back and says, "This is a terrible idea. Nobody here even wears shoes." And the next day, the other business development leader calls back and says, "This is a phenomenal market. Nobody owns shoes yet." And it's this, they both had the same data available to them. They both had the same situation. They were in the same country. They saw the same people. How one of them interpreted it versus the other one makes all the difference in the world, and probably makes the difference in how the people reporting to you and work around you see your ability to react to these situations.
Yeah, no, I love that example, and I think it's it speaks to what we've talked about previously on the podcast, which from a leadership standpoint is being positive and looking at challenges as opportunities, being realistic, but at the same time understanding that as a leader, there's a different level of responsibility. You have to be self-aware, and you have to realize that what you say and do is always being watched, and that language matters. I was just having some dialogue just last week with a leader about very specific language and saying certain things, but also being aware of not to say certain things, because you want to have the luxury of saying things and then somebody's like, well, wait a minute. And you say, well, that's not what I meant. Right. Yeah. Right. But that's exactly what you said. Right. And if you're not listening to what you're saying, if you don't understand the power of those words, then what happens when you're a leader of people is that people will hear what you said and then take that as gospel. And then that now becomes a strategy, or that's a statement, or that is, on behalf of the leadership team. And so it is really important that, outside of just the composure element of this, but that as a leader, you understand all of the dynamics of being able to show up, be positive, be aware, be ready for things that may knock you off your center. If you live in the space of knowing that those things could happen at any moment, you tend to be able to your point earlier, to react to them differently and more prepared, and without losing the composure that can even escalate the issue to higher heights.
I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack.
The 1 minute hack.
Okay, so for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I'd like for you to do. Get out your pen and paper, and I want you to write down these 4 things in regards to being able to help you maintain your composure when working through either big obstacles and or adjustments to strategy that may be sudden and quick. Number 1, don't let your emotions get the better of you. Number 2, don't take things personally. Number 3, listen as much or more than you speak. And number 4, remain positive. I really just wanted to touch on a couple of these quickly here. Obviously, don't let your emotions get the better of you. That's pretty easy to understand. I would always suggest doing something like when you hear something that may start to make you heat up, or you can feel the passion coming to the surface, count backwards from 10 just to make sure that you don't say or do anything too quick that can have a negative impact on your team. Don't take things personally. There's many times where as a leader, you will be challenged or a strategy will be adjusted that you are very heavily involved in or that you're very passionate about. And by reacting to that in that way, that can also cause some strife amongst your team and can create stress when it doesn't need to exist. And then listen as much or more than you speak. It's really important to allow your team to vent to you. So when you're going through times of change, asking them what they think, allow them to vent, and then be a supportive leader to them, as opposed to the one who is leading the dialogue because of your own emotions and your own thoughts. And then remaining positive is as simple as that. Be the guiding light, be the positive light, and be the person who is bringing the team together to look in the face of these challenges and to see them as opportunities to get better.
I think that's a fantastic 1 minute hack. And keep in mind, we're not saying be positive to the point where you lose the trust of your team. This isn't the band playing on the Titanic while the ship sinks around them. Positive doesn't mean a lack of being realistic about the situation. It means that a general understanding and a knowledge that this too shall pass. Whatever is happening, things have happened in the past and things will happen in the future. And be confident in your abilities, in your leadership, and the abilities of your team, and you'll be able to get through it better.
Yeah, no, I completely love that. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.